Welcome back to the Misdiagnosed podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin Pyle, and I'm really excited to bring you the very first interview of the show ever. It's all been solo episodes up until now. And this person is a very special person, someone who inspired me in many ways, but mostly to get my ass going on TikTok. I stumbled across her when I was looking on TikTok for people talking about psychiatry, critical psychiatry, anti-psychiatry, the truth about psychiatry. I was just meant to find her because I found her. The founder of Free Range Psychiatry, her website is freerange.org. Dr. Kendra Campbell was my guest on the show. It is a nonprofit organization. You're going to hear all the details in the show. She's helping people heal their mental illness, safely taper off psych meds, and get their lives back from big pharma. There's so much overlap in what we talk about on our podcast, including the fact that she just finished a big adventure living in an RV, and now she's living in Florida as well. She's in Panama City, which is so exciting. I already told her I'm going to visit when I have my van. She has a very fascinating story herself, which you'll hear in the episode. You'll also hear what psychiatrists don't learn in school. It's absolutely shocking. You'll hear why most doctors come out of school traumatized, and some very alarming things that Dr. Campbell experienced while she was in med school that has to do with big pharma and their infiltration of the medical school system. Very interesting stuff. I worked really hard editing this. It's a little more difficult to edit interviews than it is to edit solo shows, but I think I did a great job. So I hope you enjoy the show. Enjoy the interview with Dr. Kendra Campbell. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I don't even know where to start. How's TikTok treating you?
Well, good. This has been an interesting experience, by the way. I think it's been about a year since I've been on TikTok and had like lots of followers and things like that. It's very fascinating. It's a fascinating place. It's such an interesting mirror of the world and like microcosm. And yeah, I just find it to be truly fascinating. I've actually learned so much about people and their mindsets and just where the world is on a lot of topics through like the responses that I get to videos. And I almost do that intentional. Like I'll put something out there and see the response, and it gives me all this interesting information. It's a weird but fun and interesting place.
The trolls are giving me a hard time right now. I'm not going to lie, because people are like, well, what credentials do you have? And I'm like, raw experience. So many doctors told me I was sick forever, and I'm not on any medication now, and I haven't had symptoms in over 2 years. So how do you deal with the trolls on TikTok?
Yeah, good question. So the trolls, yeah, I have a never-ending supply of trolls. I will say that probably when I first started out, it did get to me a little bit, I think in the beginning, but I go through a whole sort of process with it. And I think because I'm so sort of just grounded in things, and that I guess as a psychiatrist too, it helps to see, I can see through what somebody is saying. So when somebody says, I hate you, I'm going to report you to the medical board, die, which, they say things like that. I see that as I am hurting, I am in pain, and I am projecting that pain upon you. I don't know what to do. You are stirring up emotions in me and truths in me that I don't want to acknowledge. I don't want to see. I'm not ready to see that. This hurts, this stings, and now I'm going to project that at you. So when I think about it like that, I guess it gives me a different way of responding to people. And so that gives me a framework. And also, not gonna lie, block. I probably right now have blocked like close to 1,000 people, like literally. Yeah, I decided in the beginning I used to have a lot higher threshold. I would wait till they started physically threatening me, and then I would block them. But now I'm just like, as soon as you say you're gonna report me to the medical board, that's enough. I don't need that. So I just sort of block, and that the block has been my friend.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty anonymous too. When you block, they don't get notified or anything. They just stop seeing your content, so they don't have an opportunity to start like reporting or anything like that, which is really good. And I remember there was one psychiatrist that I forgot whether it was one of your videos or one of my videos. There was a psychiatrist on there that was like, I'm not talking to you. I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say. I think I tagged you and I said, I'm not making this up. There's real psychiatrists out there that agree with me. And he was just saying like, oh, I don't believe anything you have to say. And I'm like, well, that's the problem. There's so many psychiatrists out there that do not listen to their patients. They have so much ego. And so I guess we can talk about that, about psychiatry. And we can start at the beginning. And you'd mentioned that you're always skeptical of psychiatry. Let's start there. Why have you always been skeptical of psychiatry as a psychiatrist?
Yeah, so that's a really great place to start. And actually, it's funny because I just posted a video that touched on this morning. So my first experience with psychiatry was as a patient. As a teenager, I had got all the D's, ADHD, ODD, everything, and then eventually bipolar. But yeah, I had a pretty unpleasant experience with psychiatry. You know, it seemed a little bit, didn't seem right to me. It always felt a little bit weird. I didn't identify with any of the things that were being told to me. Any of the labels that they were giving me didn't make sense in my mind. That was the sort of the impetus for me. I actually studied psychology in undergrad. I was like, okay, let me, the classic sort of, I have problems, let me go to school and figure it out. And then right after I graduated, I started working at a state psychiatric hospital. So I was actually even on the like acute unit. So the people who were the most ill, acutely suicidal, homicidal, manic, psychotic were the people that were on my unit. And I worked as a psychiatric technician, which means I spent sometimes like 12 or even longer shifts with the patients. I wasn't in the nurse's station, doing it. I was right there with the patients. So I was talking to them just nonstop, having conversations with them and interacting with them. From that perspective, I kept thinking, it seems like all of these people are really traumatized, like ridiculously traumatized. And I haven't met a single one who didn't have a ridiculous amount of trauma. And it feels to me like maybe this is actually what's going on here. Maybe they don't have schizophrenia, bipolar, like maybe they're just really responding to this super trauma. But I, of course, thought to myself, but what do I know? I'm just a psychiatric technician. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. And I would see the doctors, I would see the psychiatrists come by, see them for 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and change their medications. And it didn't do anything. It didn't make them any better. Usually it often made them worse. And as you know, and I know, nobody ever wanted to take their medications. So my job, and I kind of regret this, honestly, that I did this, but this was my job, was to convince people to take them. And I did that. I unfortunately did try to convince people to take their meds because that was my job and I was supposed to help the doctors do that. So that's essentially where it started. And it was in that job that occurred to me too. I was like, this is what I think is happening, but I don't really know. So my mind was like, let me become a psychiatrist so I can figure out if there's something that I don't know. They must know something that I don't know. There must be some missing piece that I'm not getting here because they have so much more education than me. So I thought, let me just try it out and figure out what it is that they know. I'll start there. And that's essentially what I did.
I love that you're just like, yeah, let me just become a psychiatrist. Like, no big deal. What was the process of becoming a psychiatrist like? What do you guys learn? Because I know there's a lot of rumors about how they don't learn anything about nutrition. They just learn about how to prescribe drugs and recognize symptoms. Is that true, or is there more to it than that?
Well, that's 1,000% true. First, you go through medical school, which is 4 years. That was grueling, right? Like horrible. I had to memorize so much stuff. And the stuff that you're learning is so not relevant. So little of what I learned in medical school do I really even use it all today. But it's like, heavy into biochemistry, anatomy, and physiology, like all this stuff. It's very grueling. It's extremely traumatizing. So even if you're not traumatized when you go into medical school, you hella definitely will be by the time you get out. It's very much like the military. So it's like sleep deprivation, food deprivation. They call you names, they call you stupid, they do this thing called pimping where they break you down. It's a total psychological warfare. And this is why, PS, that you see that the most doctors, not even most, all doctors are extremely traumatized. They're extremely injured themselves. And this is what trickles down to the patients. This is my whole thing, by the way, is like, if we heal the healers, if we heal these people who are supposed to be helping people, if we focus there, then, oh my God, imagine, then all of that would pour down to all the other people who need to be helped. So we need to not forget that, I think. And that's an often forgotten thing. So that was the 4 years of that. And then there was 4 years of residency in psychiatry where I learned to prescribe. My residency out of all the ones in the country was probably the most like hippy dippy, for lack of a better word. Like it was the most, we're going to throw in a little bit of extra something here and there and make it a little bit nicer. But 99.9% of it was just learning how to prescribe psychiatric medication. Despite what a lot of psychiatrists say about this chemical imbalance theory, like now that it came out that it's not correct, somehow like all the psychiatrists that I know, by the way, when that happened said, we never thought that there was a chemical imbalance and we never said that. Yet I know that is not true. I mean, that is what I was taught. That was what I was taught in residency. When it was about 8 years ago, right? I was taught that there is a chemical imbalance and these drugs treated. That was what was shoved down my throat. That is what I told patients because that's what I was supposed to tell them. So no, I did not learn about nutrition. We had a little dribble of psychotherapy, but not much. I would say 99% of what I now do as a holistic psychiatrist to help people with their mental health is not what I learned in medical school or my residency. None of it. And then I actually even went on to do 2 fellowships at Columbia University. So I did one in public psychiatry and one in emergency psychiatry. So I even like super specialized. And interestingly, I tell you that when I went into this, that was 9 years of my life, right? So I went in thinking, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to whatever. And then 9 years later, I came out. And I'm not going to lie, I was really traumatized. I was a mess, physically a mess, mentally a mess. I was not well. That whole process was not very good for my body, mind, or spirit. And it crushed me. It did crush me. When I came out, I did work for 3 or 4 years in traditional psychiatry. It was actually in an emergency room setting, but still I was prescribing medications. I was doing it. But that part of me, like a little curious, hopeful part of me that before I went in knew that whole time, it was like whispering to me, kind of like, this isn't what you want to do. Like, don't forget. And then the voice just got louder and louder and louder until I had a whole personal mental health crisis. I was suicidal. I was very sick. And then that's when I was like, shit, I sort of had this big epiphany and realized, wait a second, this isn't what I want to do. And this isn't working. I got to get the fuck out of here. So that's essentially what it did.
Wow, it's so interesting. Like, I'm fascinated by this, especially knowing how traumatic the process of becoming a doctor, any kind of doctor, it sounds like, because you all start with the same foundational brainwashing, we'll call it. It's so institutionalized. I'm sure you've looked into the history of how, like, the Rockefellers financed medical schools and gave money to the schools who were going to indoctrinate to hide the cures for cancer and all those things. It's not going to go down that rabbit hole. There's so many different rabbit holes to go down, but understanding that it's a traumatizing process and that the doctors really don't know anything, but they're put forward in our society as if they know everything and the patients know nothing. And we give our power away to people who don't know anything about us. And your intuition was speaking to you. It reminded me of the time when I first got hospitalized. I was in the acute setting and I was having a spiritual awakening is what was happening. I also was smoking a lot of pot and I had just gotten separated from my husband of 8 years and we were going to get divorced and I didn't see that coming. There's so much trauma there. And I didn't understand what trauma was. I didn't understand mental illness at all. I just knew that I was in that place for a reason, to understand the system and just realizing that people here don't know anything. They don't care. They don't know who I am. They think I'm crazy because they don't know me. It was a little bit scary to realize how much power they had over me just because they were doctors. Just because in the whole Baker Act thing, I got Baker Acted twice and 5150 twice. I can't get life insurance because of that, because I'm a suicide risk. You are labeled for life when you get labeled by the state as having a mental illness, which is what happened to me. So even though I'm healthy now, like, the state's never going to see it that way unless I lie on an application or get somebody else to buy me a gun, which I don't intend on doing. But yeah, I mean, there's so much that I didn't know that I know that I went into that situation for a reason. I want to talk more about your awakening process. And like, you were suicidal, and that, of course, like, I'm sure precipitated a lot of your awakening process. Were you on medications at the time?
Yeah. And I also just want to say, just quick, what you said about the indoctrination. That is absolutely the case, right? So I didn't realize that I paid $500,000, by the way.
Whoa. Thank you for your transparency,
exactly.
by the way. I'm
I'm very transparent about how much debt that I'm still paying off my medical school debt. So that's going to haunt me for a long time. But anyway, so yeah, I paid a lot of money to be brainwashed and indoctrinated into a system. Like, had I only known, those many years ago that was the case. So I just wanted to say that. So to come back to what your question was. So yeah, I was working in and actually running. I was the assistant director of a very, very busy emergency room in New York City, like probably the busiest one. I was working like 80 hours. It was just insane. And I had all kinds of toxic habits. I was smoking, drinking. Like, I was trying to numb myself out because I felt miserable. I didn't realize that at the time, obviously. I had a lot of mental health stuff going on. So I had daily severe anxiety, almost daily panic attacks. The suicidal thoughts started coming. In addition to that, I had all these physical problems, which again, you would think as a doctor, I would have realized all this, right? Like, what now it's so funny because I look back on it and I'm like, it's so obvious. But at the time, I was just so deep in it and connect the dots. But I had gastritis, I had weird stuff where like I couldn't swallow, I had all these bizarre, very severe endometriosis, like really horrible periods. Like, I had all this stuff, never once connected that they were all related. And so because of that, I was on probably close to 20 psychiatric and like medical medications, various things. Like, I was on a crap ton of medication.
Holy crap. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a
And here
lot.
I was like, again, like how I was and how I was functioning and what I was doing is the perfect example of what is going on with most doctors and psychiatrists. So I'm not rare. This isn't a weird thing that this happened to me. This is what everybody is going through. And so, like, when you see or hear, like, probably that psychiatrist that was commenting, I can tell you there's a very good chance that that psychiatrist was on a psychiatric medication themselves. Almost certainly. Almost all of my colleagues that I know, like from medical school and residency right now, are on psychiatric medications. I think I once read that like 50% of medical students are on psychiatric medications or something like that. It's very, very, very high. It's rampant. And just think about that though, too. When you're on it, and as you know too, the medication sort of shuts down your frontal lobe. It stops you from being able to understand and perceive things accurately, and also blunts your emotions, numbs you out. So imagine now, those are the people that are delivering mental health care in this country. People who are numbed out, traumatized, on a bunch of medications, broken and stuff like that. I was that, which is unfortunately, that's the rule, not the exception. Like that's what's very common. I had a lot of like fertility stuff. I had been told by multiple doctors that I needed a full hysterectomy, but there came this day where it's so weird. Just randomly, I was like, I really want to have a baby, which is like, I don't even know where that came from. I now realize it was coming from a higher source, but it just sort of popped in my head. And I was like, man, that would be nice. And so I ended up finding this doctor who was basically somewhat holistically minded. And I was going in just to see her. And I remember like, that was the worst of my worst. Like I was on the 20 different medications. It had gotten to the point where I literally, I couldn't eat because I couldn't swallow. I had no idea why. I was a hot mess. I was in and out of the emergency room. And I was just telling her like, God, I just realized that I would love to have kids, but it's like, obviously I am so fucked up. I am so sick. I'm on so many pills. Like, there's no way. Plus, I've been told I can't have kids. And she was like, I think if you actually quit your job and completely changed your life, you probably could have kids. And I was like, really? I never even thought of that. And so it was sort of that happened. And that had happened sort of shortly after I had this being discharged from an emergency room and feeling suicidal. And anyway, it all sort of just came together in this moment where I was like, I went from being, and I now recognize this because I've seen this in so many of my patients. I didn't really realize what was happening at the time, but it was right then and there that I shifted out of victim mode, like into my power. And I was like, wait a second. This whole time I've been thinking, there's nothing I can do. I just have to feel horrible. I'm miserable. Oh my God, I have all these medical problems. Like, woe is me. It's all, and I just have to take these pills forever because I'm so broken. That was the narrative that I had been telling myself all these years. And then all of a sudden I was like, no, wait a second. What if I just take control of my life right now? What if I literally just quit everything that I'm doing, like toxic, change my job, do all this shit, and just get my health back together? Why not?
What's the worst that could happen, right? Could it get worse?
Happen. Yeah, exactly. And I have to say, like, sometimes I don't like to share my story because I think mine was such a radical shift. And I think some people are like, wait, that didn't happen to me like that. So I'm not saying this is how it works for everybody, but this is how it works for me. So I literally, that day, I quit everything. I quit drinking, smoking, like I did everything. I changed my diet. I didn't quite quit my job then. I cut back on my hours, so a lot. And I started slowly tapering myself off the medications. Now, I did not know back then everything that I know now. So I went pretty quickly. Had I known what I know now, I probably would not have I wouldn't have ever advised somebody to go as quickly as I did, but I did. I got off in a few months. After a couple of months, every single physical symptom I had was gone. Every single one of them. I didn't have the gastritis. I could swallow. I had a normal period, everything. I had no panic attacks. I had no anxiety. I was sleeping, like literally in a couple of months, off of everything and like totally normal human being.
That's miraculous. And for lack of a better term, like, duh, right? In retrospect, you look at it like, yeah, of course. And it's so wild to me how people have bought into the lie that mental health and physical health are separate when everything is integrated and every system informs the other system, and health is really balanced. And so if your brain doesn't have what it needs to function properly, it's not going to work properly. And you got to give it stuff. It's like, would you put orange juice in your car? Would you feed your cats Skittles? Would you do those things? And without the expectation that that would make the car not run properly or the cat get sick? And if the answer is no, then why are you feeding yourself all of these synthetic things, expecting your organic, very organic? All of us are completely 100% organic at our core, putting in all these synthetic chemicals. Duh, we're not going to work properly, right? But it just goes back to that narrative. You mentioned the word narrative, and that's totally what it is there's a narrative of victimization, like for me, or in terms of like the marketing side of it. As a marketer, marketer. I've marketed a lot of things. I've made a lot of money marketing. I know marketing when I see it, but it's so sneaky in the big pharma world and the psychiatry world and the whole mental health thing and the community that they've created about don't pill shame. It's okay to be on meds. My mom even told me that, where my mom was, an herbalist, not an herbalist like officially, but it was all into herbs growing up. When I got put on these medications, I was taking Adderall and Xanax, one after the other. And she's like, it's okay to be on medication, Kate. And I was like, and inside I knew that I didn't always need it. Why do I need it now? It is the culture of the victimization of we're a victim of our bodies. Our bodies are so intelligent and they love us. We are living inside these bodies. We're meant to work together with our bodies. It's everything else. Why are doctors smarter than our bodies? Like we need to have more faith.
Like what you said. Yeah, like right now to me, when I know this stuff and I'm teaching this stuff, I'm trying to spread this message, like it's so blatantly obvious to me. It's like so like duh. But yet at the time it wasn't. And that's the thing. And I always go back to that too when people come to me and I realize that they're back there where I was. And then when I really have now had the time to step away from it and sort of trace it back, it's exactly what you said. It is so much societal level programming, right? Like, I mean, it's so heavily programmed and so subtle. And like you said, the big pharma, their marketing is, I mean, it's the most brilliant marketing on the planet. There's nobody that can market better than the pharmaceutical companies because it's brilliant. Like you said, they're the ones who started this don't stigmatize, right? They started that.
They started all of it. Yeah.
It's so brilliant. And NAMI's a big part of that. And that's our whole thing, right? Don't stigmatize. Try the next med. It gets better. Just keep trying a different medications. Like that's NAMI is, I think last I looked, it was about 80% funded by the pharmaceutical companies. For all practical purposes, it's a big pharma front organization. But that, my friend, that's marketing. Like that's brilliant, but evil, unfortunately, because you don't realize that that's what it is. We just live in this society. It's so normalized. Nobody realizes that we're just, going for marketing ploys here.
Yeah, and it's all interwoven. It's so corrupt, like what is it? Is it Bayer owns Monsanto? And so there's chemical companies that are owned by pharmaceutical companies. So the pharmaceutical companies are affecting our food supply. And then everybody's on all these medications. And of course, birth control pills are still somehow super effing popular, even though they've been labeled as a carcinogen, since 2007. Like, but nobody tells you that when you get put on them. All that's going into our water supply. People are drinking hormones. People are drinking other people's pharmaceuticals because they're not filtering their water. They're drinking fluoride, which is an aluminum byproduct. All that stuff is affecting how we function. And even though there's more people on medication than ever before, more people are getting diagnosed with mental illness than ever before, nobody's noticing, probably because of all the medication clouding their judgment. Nobody's noticing that the medications aren't working. They just think, oh, well, it's genetic, right? And that's a lie. It is not genetic. There's toxins that can be passed on through the bloodline. The one video that got taken down by TikTok from me was, I guess I didn't say I wasn't a doctor and this is my only opinion or whatever. I said that bipolar wasn't genetic because that's another lie. There's metals that get passed down and there's toxins that get passed down. Even DDT gets passed down through the bloodline. Radiation, mercury, because that used to be like the go-to medication was mercury. And people have like completely forgotten history. Probably because that's all been erased on purpose. If you control what people think of as history, you can control the whole population. It's been working. And so you're right. It's completely brilliant. It's completely brilliant what they've been doing. It's sinister as hell, but it's the most brilliant marketing there is.
Like you said, like they make money off of the toxin itself, right? They sell their glyphosate and stuff. They make money there. And then they make money in the cure. But the cure actually isn't the cure. It just makes you more sick. So then they make more money. It's insane. Like you said, and P.S. I just want to say I've had a lot of videos taken down. So it's not just you. I just had one taken down this morning. It happens a lot. And that's one of the reasons why I say TikTok is a very interesting place, because it's very curious to me, the ones that they decide to take down versus not. It's very interesting, but that's a whole separate
Which ones did they take down?
Well, the one that they took down just now was COVID one that I did, which I usually don't hear much COVID stuff because I know not to, but I did one where I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. All I did was I put pictures of, I got notification as a doctor. They send notifications to doctors about stuff. And I got this notification as a doctor that said, hey, just beware, all this stuff is going on with the vaccines, blah, blah, blah. And so I literally just posted that. The thing, I didn't even say anything about it. I just put informed consent, posted it. It was just a public information, an email that I had received as a doctor, and that was taken down. I didn't even
What?
say anything. Yeah. And so I've had lots of other ones that I've taken down, just various stuff, like ones where I say I don't believe in the labels of mental illness, the DSM, that was taken down. I've had a whole bunch, probably like 20 or 30 videos taken down.
You mentioned the DSM. I spent a lot of time researching the DSM. I bought the second version of it. I found it on eBay. I literally spent $950 on this book because I wanted it so bad. I wanted to look into it and see how this little tiny book has morphed into this giant book that it is now. Come to find out, even from reading from people who worked on it, Alan Francis, he was in the Medicating Normal documentary that Mad in America produced, I believe. He's like a kind of a undercover whistleblower. He's still a psychiatrist, I think, and there's people talking about this, but those people get silenced or they're said, they're quacks or whatever. But the DSM is literally just a dictionary of terms. It doesn't talk about treatment at all. And that's what they learn in school, is to recognize the symptoms. It doesn't talk about the cause, because there's this underlying assumption of, okay, let's talk about this. What, besides the chemical imbalance, is there any other reason that y'all are taught in school causes? What are the causes for mental illness? Is there any talk about how nutritional imbalances or toxins in the brain, metals, things like that could cause mental illness? Or is that just kind of like swept under the rug because there's metals in the drugs?
Essentially, what I was taught was that it's genetic. It is a chemical imbalance. That's what I was taught, basically. And yes, I was taught to know that like some environmental things like stress, trauma can maybe like trigger it. But really the where it's at is it's a chemical imbalance and it's caused by this genetic problem. That's what I was taught in my training. PS though, now that big paper came out, which showed that that's total BS and there is no chemical imbalance, I'm on a bunch of traditional psychiatry forums and I stay on them intentionally. They don't really know that I'm there because I love reading what they say. So I'm very like tapped into what they're thinking, what they're saying. And when that big paper came out, basically they jumped to like this whole thing about, oh, well, maybe it's just increasing neuroplasticity. So that's their latest thing. Their latest thing is that drugs increase neuroplasticity. I'm like, yeah, but they actually do the opposite. Like they don't. In fact, it's insanity. But so that's the next thing that they're hanging on to. Just a quick thing about the genetics. I wanted to say that, yeah, so, that's what I was taught. Now that I have read a bazillion books on this topic and come to really understand what it is, of course, we know that probably 1 to maybe at the most 4% of a genetic, cause of all sort of mental illnesses. NIH spent millions of dollars. I don't know if you know this, but like millions of dollars trying to prove and find a gene that caused all of the different mental illnesses. This was over the past like 10 years. And finally, about like a year or two, they came out and they said, well, we tried and we didn't find anything. Of course, the way that they said it in their publication, it was like, but we're going to keep trying because, blah, blah, blah. But like clearly, they put a lot of money into finding this and they couldn't find diddly squat because it doesn't exist. And we now, of course, know that it's really not genetics, it's epigenetics, right? It's above the genes. It's the things that interact. Do the genes that we have matter? For sure they do, but they matter very little, really, when it comes down to it. 1% or even less of all diseases, mental, physical, whatever, are probably like genetic, right? If you have it, you probably like Down syndrome, like just something that if you have it, you have it. Even that's modifiable, but still, that's 1%. So that means like 99%. So all these things, cancer, depression, like all this stuff that we've been taught is just what we have to deal, isn't. Like epigenetics means modifiable. It means that we could do something about it. So yeah, I also just wanted to say back with what you were talking about, the DSM, I consider myself to be a little bit of a whistleblower as well. But in my residency, I was on the American Psychiatric Association Assembly. I was an assembly member. I was a representative for the state of New York. So that was what I did. I went to all the APA meetings, and it happened to be, that was the year that they were creating the DSM. So I was in the APA assembly while they were creating DSM-5. So I was in those meetings, actually. I saw the stuff that happened. I wasn't in all of them, but I was in a lot of them. And I was in like the big discussions when they were deciding, like voting on which things were going to be in or whatever. And so, I mean, I can tell you like exactly what Dr. Francis says, like for sure, like it's a joke. I mean, it is a total farce joke. There's absolutely no science behind this. It was literally like they're just voting on shit. Like, and it's a bunch of old Caucasian, like mostly hetero men, like in a room voting on like shit like this. And now we think that, whatever, eating disorder, blah, blah, blah is a new thing. And this is a new thing. Like it is a total farce. Not even a little shred of science goes into it.
That's exactly right. There is no science. It's not valid. It's not, what is the other word?
Reliability.
Reliability,
Like, in,
that's right.
yeah,
Yeah, because
yeah, I diagnosed.
anybody can be diagnosed with depression. Anybody, like, there's normal ups and downs of life, just gets diagnosed as bipolar. And so you had been diagnosed with bipolar as well. You probably already know I've been diagnosed at least 6 times by 6 different psychiatrists. What has your experience been with bipolar?
Oh, good question. So yeah, I've probably been diagnosed like 3 or 4 times, maybe. I know, like when I was the first diagnosis came when I was 16, and then a couple of times during my adulthood, for various reasons, I made the mistake of going to a psychiatrist. I don't know why I did that, but I did, and they relabeled me as that as well. I mean, one thing I'll say is that yeah, it's so hard for me to talk about because I don't really truly believe that it exists. Like I really don't really truly believe that it's an entity. And what I see it as is, are there underlying like traits and things that I see amongst people who get this diagnosis? I do. And in fact, I think that's why I got the first diagnosis. So like as a teenager, like one of the things that I remember them saying, so they did the whole test on me. They tested my IQ, the whole shebang. And I remember when I was sitting in the room with the psychiatrist and my parents, and they were saying she has bipolar disorder. And I remember the big thing that they were harping on at that time that was like clinching this diagnosis was the speed with which I talk, which you can, I talk fast, and the speed with which I completed their tests. So like they would give me a test to do, and it should take somebody an hour, like stack the blocks or whatever. They have these little things. I could finish it in like 5 minutes. That was used as evidence of my bipolar disorder. Like that is the biggest joke. Yeah, anyway, it's just so crazy like what they hang their heads on. But anyway, and now many years later, I understand that I think really fast and I talk really fast. And you know what? That is one of my biggest strengths in life. That's how I got through med school, like 4.0. This is how I've built an organization. This is an asset of mine. This is not something that is pathological. It doesn't mean I have bipolar. Like this is like my biggest strength in life. And then other times when I was diagnosed with it, like clearly there were so many other things that were causing these symptoms that were looking like mania and even psychosis. So for example, at some point, like you said, you mentioned that you were smoking weed and had the divorce. So I was drinking heavily at one point, like clearly that was interfering. I now realize that I had insane hormone imbalances, which were making it look like I was having these up and down kinds of things. Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think it's a combination of both. The reason that I got diagnosed with this disorder, I would say, is that one, I probably do have this predisposition. Like I have this sort of personality trait of mine that already puts me in sort of bipolar land. And then on top of that, I had all these other insults, right? So I had the hormone imbalances and the drinking and all these other things, which all was this sort of perfect storm to make me appear as this sort of bipolar. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah,
But
you did. I asked what your experience was, and I think that was a great description of it. And I think what's crazy about bipolar is that if you look up on any of those mainstream websites about bipolar that look all reputable and stuff, that are also heavily funded with advertising from big pharma, they'll say that it's a lifelong illness. There is no cure. But then if you read more into it, they say that they don't know the cause. How can you know that there's no cure if you don't know what's causing it? Because that's what I found out in my own experience, was there's things that cause bipolar disorder. And even from like the medical medium books, which he's not a doctor at all. I'm sure you've heard of medical medium in your holistic journey, like all about life-changing foods and balancing out all of your body systems will help your brain balance out too. It's all a system, and they don't even talk about that. They're like, it's just something that you have all the time. And they told me that it was dormant. Like it's common for it to flare up or present itself around age 30 in females. It's more common in females than males, and there's reasons for that, I'm sure, with our messed up society. It's a mess. And what's also strange too is that when you start, like I went through a long period of suicidal depression, and I was on Xanax, which I now know was a major cause of that, perpetuating that. And then I was on Adderall and Xanax, like Adderall during the day and Xanax at night to help me sleep, because it just really messes with everything. It was blowing out my adrenal glands. And then what happens a lot of times, I think, with people with bipolar is that they think any good mood they have, which they're feeling good about life in general, oh, that's hypomania. And so like any good mood is just a symptom. So are you supposed to feel joyful in life? Yes. Yep. Like what is this if people are in a good mood, if they're feeling, I was feeling really happy after my divorce. Like I was elated because I think I was not being truthful with myself about not being happy in the marriage. And so when he said that he wanted a divorce, I was like, I'm free. I went from thinking I was gonna have to be with this guy forever because I promised in my wedding vows I would never leave him. And I was identifying as like, you don't go back on your word. I was trying to do the right thing, but felt so trapped and didn't think I could do anything about it, to, oh my God, like my life begins now. So it goes back to the whole narrative of mental illness is normal and making excuses for why so many people have it instead of finding solutions. And people are buying into it. And so how do we get people out of that? What do you have to tell somebody to help them realize, especially when they're intoxicated on a consistent basis by these drugs? How do we get through to them with the truth?
Yeah, that's like, yeah. And in my mind, like that's sort of like the biggest question. And one that I don't really have the answer to. But my approach right now is just the whole analogy of planting the seed. Sometimes that's all that you can do is just go out and plant a bunch of seeds. Some of them are going to grow, some of them are not. And that's really all that we can do. Because like you're saying, I mean, we're up against so many forces. One of the biggest ones being what's called intoxication agnosia or spellbinding, right? When you're on these substances, you can't tell. Your ability to understand and see and perceive is so severely impaired that you will believe anything that they tell you. So once you're loaded, especially people who are like on bipolar meds, right? They're just loaded up on all these meds. And then they go to these psychiatrists and they tell them all this stuff. Of course they're going to believe it. How would you not, right? How could you possibly see past that? So I think it's a huge challenge and one that sometimes I feel a little overwhelmed by because I'm like, I want to save everybody. But for me, it's kind of like, I just remind myself, I clearly can't save everybody. And I am not going to be able to help a lot of people. There's some people, a lot of people who are just never going to get it and they're never going to change. And that's okay. That's their path. That's their journey. That's what's happening for them. And then for other people, I can at least help to spread this message. And that's one of the reasons actually why the TikTok has been so valuable to me. And the reason that even though it's a little bit weird and I get censored and I have some problems with it, that I stay on there is because I get hundreds of messages from people just saying, oh my God, I never would have noticed. And I'm sure you get the same, like, I never would have thought of this and I never would ever. And clearly these seeds that I'm planting are growing. And in my mind, that's the best that at least that I can do. I know is to just keep trying.
Super encouraging to hear that you've had so many videos taken down and you haven't given up yet, because I've had one and I'm like so timid because I don't want to get banned, but I'm getting smarter at it and I've only been at it for like a month and a half. So I've grown pretty quickly. I didn't think that would happen. I thought it would just be like 200. I'd be in the 200s, stuck in the 200s with the views that you get every day. But my videos consistently get a lot of views if I post them. It just comes down to, I also get wrapped up in it. I spend like too much time editing one video and then I overthink it. And then I don't feel like it, or I don't know. You live in an RV, or is it a bus, a converted bus?
I did up until literally 1 month ago. So I was living in it and we were traveling around the country. And then literally 1 month ago, I just had this epiphany that it was time to take a break from that. So we moved into a little place I'm in Panama City Beach, Florida right now. So we've decided that we're probably going to live here and we still have the RV. So travel, but just doing it full time was getting I was burning out a little bit with it. So we're taking a little break. But
That's so awesome. That's so awesome that you have that flexibility to be able to do that, and how you've listened consistently just since we've been talking. You've said like, I had this epiphany. I heard this voice inside, and like you're consistently listening to that. And I think that's awesome. I'm definitely coming to visit. I live in Winter Park, Florida, and I'm going to be moving out of this house. And I've lived here for 5 years. I had this house with my ex-husband. He moved out 5 months after he moved in and just couldn't hang, but I'm turning it into a vacation rental and building out a Sprinter van. So I'll be hitting the road for a while, just solo, because I've been single for a while now, and I just want to live it up before I do settle down and become the best version of myself and really be free and clear. And because I feel like home ownership, I live here by myself. This house is way too big for me. I have 4 cats, and it just makes more sense to turn it into something that's making money instead of taking not just money but energy from me, where I just feel so scattered in so many different directions. Like, did the plants get water this week? What's the pool pH? Oh, the pool's not working properly, or this thing's cracked and I gotta get that fixed. It's just like, let me just put somebody else in charge and then also make money on it, and then I can go live my life in a tricked out van. Because have you seen these vans that they convert and they just look like little houses on wheels? It's incredible. Like, I'm pumped about it.
So insane. I'm so happy that you're doing it. I really feel like it's something that everybody should do at least some point in their life. But right now, this is like the perfect time too. Because that's the thing for me. Like, if I didn't have 2 young kids, I probably would have done it for longer. But it was just like, it was just getting a little
I don't know how people do it with kids, or even with a partner, like living in a van with a partner. I don't think I could do that. Like, they're going to have their own van.
A little bit insane. But yeah, just that whole experience of traveling, I feel like it's so nourishing for the soul. It's such a good thing to do. Like there's so much that you learn from it. And if that's where that is sort of one of my big messages, like you're saying, like that I listen to my intuition. Yes. So I didn't do that most of my life, right? Or at least I didn't do the best job of it. And now I'm at that point where that's all I listen to. It's pretty crazy. I walk some people through this and they're like, that's literally how you make decisions. But I've stopped making decisions using my brain. Completely don't do it. I don't think, is this logical? Like, does this thing make sense? I don't get a spreadsheet. I don't do any of that. That's not how I make any decisions in my life. I literally just sit there and go, okay, what do I need to do? And sometimes it's like totally batshit crazy. Like sometimes my heart is like, go do this. And I'm like, my brain is like, what? No. But I sort of just do it anyway and just trust it. That has been the most amazing thing for my life. Like that has really been why I clearly would be diagnosed with permanent hypomania. With it, really, that hypomania is my baseline. But for me, what that means is actually just being truly happy and joyful every day.
Yeah, that's the way we're supposed to be. And we're supposed to feel joy every day. We're not supposed to be manic every day. There's certainly people who are manic, I don't think are really happy. And I've been manic before. And when you're not really feeling in control, like it's just something else going on. But that hypomania state where you're just like relaxed and you know that you trust source, source energy is flowing through you and you're doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. And there's a lot of, talking about trauma, that it lives in your body. And it's something I've been working on recently, is especially with the decision to move out of the house and realizing how much stress it was causing me and how now I have to remind myself that it doesn't have to be that way. And the reason that I wake up and feel like not getting out of bed is because of all the other times that I woke up and didn't feel like getting out of bed. And so it's like it becomes a habit, like a memorized emotion that you feel. And I learned that from Joe Dispenza talking about the memorized emotions. And I've also read Bruce Lipton's book, The Biology of Belief, talking about the epigenetics and how all those things influence and how influenced we are by our environments too. And even though, this house is nice, but if I have to sit in front of my computer and make new stuff and start new businesses and work just to pay for it, and I don't get to actually enjoy anything, what's the point, And so it's all backwards. That was a big part of my awakening too, is realizing how backwards everything was, where people trust doctors instead of themselves and how we're taught not to trust ourselves and not to trust that inner voice that says you're not really mentally ill. They just think you are, and that's their problem, and what that really means. And so looking back on your journey and on my journey, reflecting back on that, just thinking like we were there, we went through the stuff we went through to get where we are now. And that's so powerful.
Yeah, it totally is. And yeah, I just wanted to add that, yeah, I think that this whole process of we start indoctrinating people from literally from like day one, from babies, right? Into this idea that you cannot trust yourself. You cannot trust yourself and you must trust an external source. That's, in my opinion, that's what schooling is about. That's literally probably the number one goal. School. Yeah. It's, there you go. Schooling and church, right? Those two big institutions, like literally it's all about, you don't know what, and it's the ultimate way to create, obedience, right? To trick people into thinking that they have no power and that they have to give it away and that all these other big entities, they have to trust them. That is the ultimate manipulation, right? It's the ultimate way to control. Again, it's brilliant. That's very much the core of my message, is that once you realize that, and it's like what you're saying too about how you're looking around at your life and you're realizing all these different things. I call that an awareness or a consciousness, right? It's like instead of being here stuck in this land and being an ego world, you think that, everything that you see here, feel, whatever, you're kind of stuck down here. You actually can take a step back and expand and actually look at everything from this bigger picture. And I feel like most people are sort of stuck. This is how, everybody's sort of stuck down in here. But once you actually realize how to bring like conscious and awareness to stuff, to your life and to the forces and to what's going on, that in my mind, that's how you liberate yourself. That's freedom, is that ability to do that. And that's the thing that I'm trying to sort of push this message. Like everybody can do this. Anybody can do this. You can actually do it anytime you want. You can shift out of that, really, like in any of that thought process. And I see that as what you're doing, right? And it's a continual process, right? Like I always say that about like healing and self-improvement or whatever you want to call it, my healing journey. Like I ain't completely healed. I will die still needing to work on shit. And I understand that. And I am totally okay with that. I know that I'm not perfect and I'm not healed, and that's okay. It's about accepting that, having radical acceptance, radical compassion, not judging where I am today, and just saying, this is where I am, and tomorrow I'm going to be in a different place, and that's okay.
Yeah. And what is perfection anyway, right? It's just that's also a made up concept, probably, to get us to buy stuff. And as
Yep.
someone who recently quit Botox because it's literally a toxin, and I really want to walk the walk, and I'm turning 36 next month, and I'm struggling, because I shouldn't say struggling. I'm watching my language. I'm challenged by it. I'm challenged by it because all that indoctrination of, wrinkles are bad and wrinkles mean this, and being single and the fear of somebody seeing you without makeup on, or I quit eyelash extensions too, and so I use mascara now and I hate it, but it is what it is. Like, I want whoever I meet, I'm becoming that best version of myself, and that energy is going to be a magnet for the right people in my life, letting that happen in my natural state, not made up to the nines and eyelash extensions and, filler in my cheeks because it like lifts up my wrinkles around my mouth and, hide the gum line that shows when I smile. I was getting Botox for that too. And it's just like a spiral. It's a snowball that just builds and builds and you get addicted to it. And then what happens to your muscle tone in your face? So when you stop, it makes things worse. And so it'd been 6 years. I'm like, okay, I can do the gua sha, like facial massage thing to like really bring life back to my face without having to fake it. Right. Which I really feel like that's what it is. And I don't want to have to fake any part of my life. Let's talk about psych meds a little bit. We talked a little bit about why people think psych meds help. Let's expound upon that a little bit, because I want to ask you what they actually do to the brain, because I think people think they help, but it's really just numbing them out. How is this actual process? What are those things actually do in the brain?
Yeah. And I have a really good video that goes into, I think, like the 5 different, I think it's like 4 or 5 ways that we think psych meds are helping someone or helping ourselves, but are not. I'll talk about the one that you're asking specifically, but some of the other ones on that list, if I can remember them off the top of my head, one of them, of course, is like the placebo effect, right? Yep. I just want to throw that up there, especially for antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications. We actually know that essentially antidepressant drugs, there's been tons of large meta-analyses that have looked at this, are not any more effective than placebo. So they're not placebos. I say this sometimes and people get a little confused. They're not sugar pills, but they're not any more effective than sugar pills. And we know based on that studies that probably the majority of the effect of like perceived something that's happening, like perceived getting better, is actually the placebo, which, especially if you read Joe Dispenza's book, You Are the Placebo, which, by the way, I'm a huge fan of Joe Dispenza, you know that you are the placebo. The person taking the pill is the placebo. Like when we say placebo, we think we're talking of some other outside thing. No, we're talking about you. This, by the way, I think is so important because so many times people will say, Zoloft saved me. I was so depressed and like now I feel so much better and Zoloft saved me. And here's the thing. Zoloft didn't save you. You saved you. By saying that it's the Zoloft, again, you're giving away your power. You're saying it was the Zoloft, this pill magically cured me, when probably it was because you thought that the pill was going to make you feel better and you did. That is you. Take that back. That is your power. So yeah, that I think that's an important thing. Another thing that I point out is that there's this whole idea of like help. They helped me. The example that I commonly give is you're in a really shitty marriage. So you're in a really shitty marriage and you're really freaking depressed because you're in a really shitty marriage. So you take some Zoloft, right? And now your marriage isn't any better, but you don't really care as much anymore, right? You're just kind of like, oh, whatever, I'll just stay in this shitty marriage. So you stay in the shitty marriage. You're less bothered by it. Sure. And so did it help you? Yeah. It helped you to stay in that shitty marriage. But this is what I see happening like on a grand scale in the world, right? Like how many people are on these like psychotropic drugs thinking that they're making their lives better when really all they're doing is making them care less about their shitty lives. And now when you don't care about your shitty life, now you've lost the drive to do anything about it. You're pacified. You're like me when I was working in that emergency room, right? I was so drugged up and numbed out that I could go in there every day and do something that I fucking hated and like do something that I was, miserable about doing. I could do that every day. And I was good at it too, by the way. I did a really great job of doing that job, right? And it wasn't until I got all that out of my system that I was like, wait a second, I'm miserable here. I never would have known if I just kept numbing myself out. I would have said they're working for me and I would have just kept going to work. So I think that's a really important one. Another one I just want to say too is the whole like short-term versus long-term effect. So sometimes some of these psychiatric medications will have some effect short-term. So you take an antidepressant or whatever, and that first couple of weeks or even months, there may be some sort of benefit, but there is always, and I call this, that's the honeymoon period. The honeymoon period will end. There's no exceptions to this rule. Some people believe, oh, it won't happen to me. It will. It's just a matter of when, not if. Like it's going to happen. The honeymoon period will end. because what happens is the brain starts fighting back. Essentially, it shifts and then they turn against you, as you know. And now all of a sudden, they're not helping your depression, they're making you more depressed. They're not helping your anxiety, giving you more anxiety. So that always happens. And then the last thing, which is this topic that Dr. Peter Bergen, who obviously I'm a big fan of, he has so many great books. He coined this term intoxication agnosignosia, which is a fancy word. He also calls it spellbinding. It's a fancy way of saying that, well, here's the perfect example, actually, I like to use is alcohol, right? Have you ever been drunk or whatever, and you're like, oh my God, I'm the life of the party, man. Like, ooh, like, right? You're like, oh, everybody loves dancing. Ooh, everybody loves my dancing, right? You don't know, right? Everybody else on the outside, especially if they're sober, is going, oh my God, no. Right? That's spellbinding. That's intoxication agnosignosia. From your perspective, it's like you're the life of the party, but in reality, you're really not. That's the best example I have of what psychiatric medication can do to you. There's probably different mechanisms of action as how this happens, but one of them is certainly the effect that it has on the prefrontal cortex and frontal lobe, which is it effectively sort of shuts down the connection there. So again, we were talking about this whole like awareness and consciousness and perceiving. So it kind of cuts that off. So you can't do that. It kind of short circuits that ability to see that, and specifically to see what the drug is doing to you. So it's very common that you may think, oh, this is great, and I'm doing so much better. But really, that's not. You're just misperceiving things, and you're not able to actually see the big picture because the drug is blocking your ability to see that.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense too that, I mean, you're putting in something into your body that affects your brain, and your brain is what we use to think and perceive and understand, listen, all of these communication skills, that's going to be altered. And I really didn't even consider that there was a lot of psychiatrists that are on psych meds, but these people are intoxicated, like basically like drunk driving, but even more dangerous. And that's going to affect their judgment in ways that are acceptable in society, and how acceptable alcohol is too. I was in a big drinking phase of my life until it's been over a year since I quit drinking like 2 cups of whiskey every night. And I kid you not, Kendra, it was I would get like one of those big 1.75 liters of whiskey, and I would be done with it in a week because I would just drink it with my diet root beer. Because if you're going to poison yourself, you're going to have to kind of without artificial coloring. So I would get like the Zevia, like don't compound the poisons. That was my thought. I'm like, how silly is this? Like 1 brown liquid with a clear liquid, because just that's what I was doing. But I would just drink, like I would measure it out. It's just as I got really curious one night, I was like, how much whiskey am I actually drinking? And it was 2 cups of freaking like Wild Turkey 101 was my favorite, but I would get the highest proof I could find, and usually in a glass bottle because it made me feel fancier. And you're right, like it. And I remember the time that I realized that alcohol was truly affecting your judgment. And you always kind of think it's maybe our egos that think this, that you're going to recognize it, like you're going to recognize that your judgment is skewed, but that's how it works. It makes you think that it's helping you, and it's not. It's really not. And there's still a few times even this year where when I was like really wired at night, and I was like, I can't sleep. It's 2:00 in the morning. I have to get up in the morning. I can't not sleep all night, and I would take like a quarter of a 1 milligram Xanax that I have left from my prescription. And the next morning I have to remind myself that the reason I feel depressed is because I took a Xanax, and that's not really who I am, and really being aware of that. Whereas before I was taking it 3 times a day, 0.5 milligram 3 times a day is what I was taking. And I was able to cold turkey it. I don't think that that's a good thing to do. I don't recommend that, because what I recognized was that I got the benzo belly really bad for like a day. And I was like, I've never had worse stomach pains in my life, until like a holistic doctor put me on progesterone at night, which I had the Epstein-Barr virus that was affecting my gut and liver. And like, oh, let's fix your thyroid. Let's fix your hormones first. And the reason that they were off balance in the first place was because of a virus. And it's just like some holistic doctors don't even know. It's just crazy. Yeah. Like you don't know what they don't know. And it's all marketing too, where it's just like, I specialize in hormones, so we're not going to look at why your hormones are low. We're just going to give you more of them. And I couldn't figure out why my stomach was hurting. It's because virus loves, I learned this from Medical Medium actually, the virus loves to eat hormones. And so if you're drinking dairy, if you're eating anything with hormones in it, including the progesterone pills, like that's food for viruses. Eggs have a lot of hormones. So even though they're not meant to be bad food, they're used in labs to grow viruses. So viruses have evolved to eat those hormones. It's just what you don't know. And of course, Medical Medium gets flack because he's he's not a doctor, he's a quack and whatever. But I feel like psychiatrists, the mainstream psychiatrists, are the real quacks, the ones who are like, they're just making up, like you're talking about in those forums, they're making up theories about neuroplasticity. And they add on, I read an article by a psychiatrist for one of my earlier episodes on the podcast, where they're using terms like neuropsychiatry and behavioral science. And like, what is that? Like, what is behavioral science? It's all marketing. Even the word antidepressant is marketing, you know, because people think, oh, you're not going to be depressed if you take this. And I remember the first time I saw that Zoloft commercial with the sad little rock. Do you remember that one? And it's just like, man, I don't know what it's like to feel depressed, but now I do. And it's my mission to help people realize why they're depressed, you know, and to have gone to hell and come back and say, hey, there's a way out. I'm proof, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's that question, why? And that's what I'm always telling people, like, just start there. Just start there. Right.
Yeah.
Because again, that I mean, again, like, how did I made it through 11 years of my training, like, and it never even occurred to me. Well, it did occur to me, but never did I really like sit through this whole, like, how come I never raised my hand in any of those classes and said, but why? You know, like, it's just such a simple question. And yet, I have a video about this where I say, like, hey, like, everybody go to your doctor right now. You want to have fun. If you want to have a fun day, an exciting, interesting day, go to your psychiatrist or whoever's prescribing your psychiatric medication and walk in there and be like, you know, I will keep taking this drug if you can tell me why. If you can tell me what is the cause, what's the actual cause of my symptoms, why am I having it, and how then is this drug going to address it, then that would be great. And I'll keep taking that, you know. And of course, if that happened, 99.999% of the people who are prescribing this would say you're fired as a patient because you're being non-compliant. Like, really, you know, right? This is the gaslighting that comes in.
Oh yeah, let's talk more about that. It's like the gaslighting and the non-compliance thing. There's one hospital, they were like, you can't leave unless you take your medication. I was just like, are you kidding me? So I took it and they gave me a prescription and make you make an appointment with a psychiatrist before you leave. And it's just all like for compliance and stuff. But what else can you say about the gaslighting that takes place in the world of psychiatry when it comes to meds and accepting your diagnosis and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it is profound. And again, I just want to say, as somebody who's gone through this training and understanding of the causes behind what's going on, I don't think that most doctors or psychiatrists are evil people. They're not. I know them. They're my friends. Like, I have plenty of them. They're not. And in fact, most of them went in for the same reason that I did. I want to help people. Most people don't go to medical school to become evil. That's not why we do this. It's a shitty journey to go through this. And so we think that we're doing the right thing. Like, we're going to help people. And so I just want to emphasize that I don't think when a psychiatrist is sitting there and people are coming, you know, they're getting all the patients, that they're thinking, I'm going to figure out how to gaslight these people and like, exploit them because I'm so evil and I enjoy it. No, that's not it. And yet, what did they do? The way that psychiatry is set up, I mean, everything from how like the appointments are structured to the visit is structured in a way that it is insanely disempowering and insanely gaslighting of the experience. We are taught that if somebody doesn't want to take their medications, we label that right away as non-compliance. And we don't, or at least I wasn't taught to talk to the patient really about that, or like, why is it that they don't want to take it? I was taught to like come up with all of these different ways, these little slogans that I could get them to take it, you know, like it's just a pill, or it's just like diabetes, right? It's just like it's just like taking insulin for your diabetes. I said that to patients. Like, I am so guilty of this. I have actually said that to somebody because that's what I was taught to say. That's what everybody told me to say. Another thing that I see, an area where I see a lot of gaslighting, probably the most, has to do with, number one, the side effects. A patient comes in, or they come to the appointment and they say, you know, I think that the Zoloft is making me feel this way. Or they even come up with something new, like, okay, now all of a sudden I have glaucoma. Two things are happening. First of all, the doctor will gaslight. The doctor will say, no, that symptom's just in your head. You probably Googled the symptoms, didn't you? That's what we were told to say. Did you Google those symptoms, right? Oh, you saw it and now you think you have it because you Googled it. It's just in your mind. Or we were also taught to say that, like, oh, it's not connected. Oh, you have diabetes and you've been on Zyprexa for a year? Totally not connected, right? So it's profoundly gaslighting, right? Because they're coming in with these very, very real symptoms and side effects, which are 100% from the drugs, but you're being told, oh no, that's part of your mental illness, right? You're just being anxious. And so it's all just labeled and pathologized instead of seeing it for what it really is. And then the other thing that I see profoundly gaslighting is like, if you want to come off of them, right? No psychiatrist or person prescribing this ever wants somebody to come off of them. In fact, because they don't know how to get people off of them is a big part of that. They don't have a clue how to do that. They will say everything that they can to keep the person on it. Then if they start coming off and they start having symptoms, right? I have a lot of videos about this, right? When you come off of a psychiatric drug, you're going to go into withdrawal. That will happen. Even the best slow taper, it really doesn't matter. You're probably going to have some level of withdrawal. If you cold turkey or go too quickly, you're going to have profound withdrawal. Withdrawal looks like psychiatric symptoms. So withdrawal looks like mania, psychosis, insomnia, depression, panic attacks. That's what withdrawal looks like. And now the psychiatrist, of course, is going to say, aha, I told you. I told you, see, you stopped your medications and now you're manic. You stopped your medications and now you're having a panic attack. Clearly, you are mentally ill. See, I told you were mentally ill and now you need to take this medication. When in fact, the freaking person is in drug withdrawal, right? That is what this is. So to tell somebody like that, that is to me the ultimate form of gaslighting. Again, I don't think they're doing it to be evil, yet it is evil. The effect is evil because they're really, really hurting people and harming people with how they're behaving towards us.
Yeah, yeah. And there's got to be that element of self-protection in it too. They don't want to get sued. They don't want to be responsible for someone's, I get comments all the time from people who are like, oh, if I went off my meds, I would die. And people really believe that, or so-and-so I know went off their meds and they died, or they committed suicide and because of their depression. And the husband and wife team that are going to be building my van, Christine, her son passed away from suicide because he was on Adderall and Xanax, and he was never that way until he started taking those drugs, and those are the exact same drugs that I was on. They do mess with your brain, and when you have those withdrawal symptoms, you just think you can't see past it. You're like, I can't imagine living my life this way. And that's the way I was feeling. I was like, the reason I was Googling suicide methods, thinking about going to Switzerland and signing up for the assisted suicide program, because you can't see past where you're just in this bubble and you feel trapped in your brain and you're just spinning around in circles trying to find a way out. Like, I thought I had every personality disorder under the sun, which all of those are made up too, and they're just also imbalances and partially related to trauma. And you just think there's no way out because you can't imagine, like, it's not living, it's existing, and just you're a vessel but you feel dead inside, and you don't want to live like that because that's not living, like just breathing. And I was wishing that I would get something that would cause me to die faster. I look back and I'm like, I have so much compassion for that person because she didn't know what she didn't know. And it really comes down to when you know the things that you don't know. And most of us have only been fed information by psychiatrists who oftentimes, that's what I want to ask you. Okay, where, in terms of, we know the DSM doesn't have anything about treatment, and we learned from you that in school you guys learn about the symptoms and what drugs to prescribe. How much education is provided to psychiatrists directly from Big Pharma? I love how you laugh. I was like, your response.
Well, I don't really know the statistics. It's hard to unearth, right? Because all of this is buried, but subtly, either there's sort of like frank education. By frank, I mean, like, we would have, in my residency, we would have all these pharmaceutical dinners we would go to. So in residency, by the way, they don't pay residents very much. You're a doctor. I was a doctor, but they paid like crap. You paid like less than you would get for working at McDonald's, right? And this is what you do. Yeah, per the hour, because you're working like 100 hours. So they would always have these drug sponsored dinners, and like, you're poor, so you're like, I'm going to that, right? The free fancy dinner. There you go. Like that. These are just all the ways that you don't realize that it's happening. So that's a more obvious way. But then there's all these different sort of subtle ways. Like, for example, I can think of one of my professors in residency. We searched, by the way, there's a website via the Sunshine Act. I can't remember what the name of the website is, but there's a website, something.org, and you can type in a doctor's name. This is fun, by the way. I encourage all listeners to do this. Go there and type in your doctor's name, and it'll show you year by year how much money that they receive from pharmaceutical companies. It's not 100% accurate because some of it doesn't get reported, but it's still a pretty interesting way, and you can sort of see. So we did that one time for this professor. He was receiving like $10 million a year from one specific drug company, and all of our lectures were on bipolar disorder. He was the bipolar expert, by the way. And interestingly enough, every lecture that we had by him basically ended up in, it was Latuda was the drug, by the way, was like, blah, 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 blah. Now you should use Latuda. You should use Latuda for this. You should use Latuda for that. So again, it was coming off, it seemed like I was just going to class. I was just being a good student, listening to this professor, and he tells me that Latuda is great, right? At the time, I almost didn't realize what it was, but now I realize he was getting $10 million a year from the makers of Latuda. And then he was then educating us as the students to sort of learn this. This is why I say it's also difficult to quantify the reach and how much, but I would say probably the reality is like 80% or so. Like, the majority of what I learned was in some way being funded on some level by the pharmaceutical companies. And so that's where all of this propaganda gets drilled into you, and you start believing it. For example, I remember when I was on my child psychiatry inpatient rotation, there's a black box warning, right? The FDA's strongest warning on the SSRIs causing suicidal thoughts and suicide in kids, right? we had a kid and they were depressed, and my teacher was telling me, okay, we're going to start them on the antidepressant. And I remember saying like, but there's a black box warning. And he, who was supposed to be so much smarter than me, he was my attending, said, oh no, they just say that. We just ignore that. It doesn't really mean anything. This kid clearly is depressed. Like we should do it. And I did it. I started this poor kid on this drug. Of course, now I know. So it was so normalized, right? That was just what you do. And that's what everybody told me to do. I was just doing what I was told. And of course, it isn't until now years later that I see that that was like the worst possible thing that one could do to a kid who is that depressed.
I mean, they've got this huge marketing budget, the pharmaceutical companies, and just knowing that that one guy was paid $10 million is a drop in the bucket. I mean, they spend billions of dollars marketing these drugs and they make billions. I think the latest statistic I saw for antipsychotics in particular was 12 billion a year just on antipsychotics, which is more than antidepressants. I think 9 billion was the same statistic at the same year. 9 billion antidepressants, 12 billion of antipsychotics in a year. And they have so much profit out of that because I don't think it's expensive at all to produce these drugs. And the stuff that's in them, artificial colors, preservatives, toxic heavy metals, the very things that are actually behind a great many of the very things that are behind mental illness symptoms, you're putting that into your brain and it's just perpetuating the problem. Going back to the brilliant marketing thing, it perpetuates the problem and it makes you a lifelong customer of big pharma. And because they're able to convince you that it is helping you because it's suppressing the original symptom, and they can convince you to take more drug. They just pull you in. I wouldn't be able to go on the road and travel and live my dreams if I had to be home to fill all my prescriptions like go see my doctor and get my Xanax prescription refilled, or be home to be able to go get my Adderall, which is a nationwide shortage of, which I just feel like that's just waking a lot of people up to the damage that Adderall does too. And people don't realize that it blows out your adrenal glands, which affects all of your hormones. And speaking of hormones, you've done a couple of videos recently about the birth control pill, and I've gotten some pushback on that. I mean, I was on birth control pill. I had a Nexplanon on in my arm when I had my first psychotic episode, actually, on top of the trauma and all the other stuff. But what role do hormones play in mental illness?
Everything. The hugest role. Yeah. Probably if I had to pinpoint one thing, it may be the biggest. I mean, it's hard to say because it's everything. And like you said, like the trauma though is sort of at the root of this, by the way, because there's always like the issue, and then there's the root issue, then there's the root issue, then there's the root issue. So it's sort of a rabbit hole to go down to where is this really coming from? But hormones have everything to do with it. My only psychotic episode was on Depo-Provera, right? So I myself have taken birth control at different points in my life. Now looking back on it, clearly was causing a lot of my mental health problems. Again, I did not learn any of this in medical school or residency. Yet since, in the past 5 years that I've been doing holistic psychiatry, I've now read so much about it. And now I routinely see, I would say out of all of my female patients, like probably 90% or so clearly have hormonal imbalances when they're coming to see me that are impacting, or even the only sole cause or the primary cause of the symptoms that they're having. And once we resolve those hormonal issues, they go away. And a good portion of them, not a good portion, but probably like 30 or 40% come in on some sort of hormonal birth control. And once we take them off of it, they feel fine. So many of their symptoms resolve. Sometimes it's not 100%, but I have had cases where it's 100%. They went from having a lot of symptoms. First thing I did is said, we got to get you off the birth control. We did. And now it's like, oh, somehow they're magically cured now.
Oh, that makes my heart so warm. It just explodes with just like joy inside of it. It's just so simple. It's just so simple to listen to our bodies and to not put the synthetic things into it. Don't break the systems. Don't try to be smarter than our bodies, because our bodies are brilliant biological supercomputers that are designed so intelligently. And there's that too. I mean, just thinking about the word psychiatry and how that is, the roots mean soul healing, but they don't even believe in the soul. And so it's actually killing the soul. It's just so ironic. Yeah.
I literally have a video about that as well, because that to me is one of the most horrible things that literally that's what we are supposed to be doing. Like that's the word psychiatry. Yet literally we do the exact opposite. I mean, the exact opposite. Everything about traditional psychiatry is soul killing, every aspect of it. The gaslighting that we were talking about, the medications and what they do. I haven't even talked about how they also disconnect you spiritually, right? That's a big part of what these psychotropic medications do. When in fact, as you know, like you were saying, we're having sort of a spiritual thing. I really truly believe that a lot of psychosis is sort of a spiritual emergency. So you're having a spiritual emergency, like that's the root of the issue. And yet the cure, antipsychotic, is going to actually disconnect you from your spirit. So that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Yeah. Do the opposite. Yeah. We're giving people the opposite of what it is that they need.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why they don't get better.
Yeah.
And then we label
why?
Chronic. And then it's
Chronic.
a chronic medical, it's chronic because we made it chronic. It would not have been. They do have done all these studies where they compared people with depression, for example, and found that if you just leave somebody alone, not even necessarily give them much, just like leave them alone, with time, most depressive episodes just get better on their own, right? They just get better. That's just a natural course. You're depressed and then you're not, even without a bunch of heavy duty interventions. Yet, if you give somebody antidepressant, now it becomes a chronic condition, right? Now they're more likely to have further episodes. It's more likely to now be this whole progression and thing that we call chronic and treatment resistant depression. Whereas if we had literally just left it alone, it wouldn't have been. That's another one of the reasons, going back to why do we think that these drugs help? There's another one, right? The natural progression of the illness. So you have something, you're depressed, you're psychotic, you're anxious, you're whatever, and then you give somebody a pill that's supposed to be the treatment, and then you come back in 4 weeks. It's just, all the drug trials, as you know, are super short, right? They don't look at somebody over a year. They look at them for, 4-6 weeks or something. So they come back in like 4-6 weeks and they say, do you feel better? And they say, yeah, I feel better. And they're like, aha, it was the pill. Wait a second. We know that the recovery rate is really high. They would have gotten better anyway. And now we're saying it was the pill that fixed them. So
brilliant marketing.
Brilliant marketing.
That's what it comes down to. And that the whole idea of chronic illness and how accepted it is, like living with chronic illness. I sold a business last year, but I was teaching people how to work at home, and I would get a lot of emails from people saying I need to be able to make money from home because I am living with chronic illness. And I heard it for so many years before I got any of my diagnoses or had any of these issues. And I just couldn't understand, like, I didn't even really think about it that much. But now I look back and I'm like, chronic illness, like just learning to accept it, learning to live with it. And they're just listening to their doctor's advice and they're just trying different things, and just how little doctors actually know is alarming. And I always credit, this podcast, I've been going through chapter by chapter Medical Medium's latest book, Brain Saver, where he actually talks to the same about the soul. There's a whole spiritual component to our bodies that science will never understand because they don't believe it exists. And so they have that bias inherently that they're never going to acknowledge the soul because they believe it's made up. You can't measure it, you can't see it. So I learned from Anthony Williams, Medical Medium, that when your brain is under fire, which when you're having mental illness symptoms, it is, especially with antipsychotics, you mentioned specifically that it cuts off your spiritual side completely. And that lines up completely with what Anthony says in the Brain Saver book, that your soul, to protect itself, your soul lives in the brain because our bodies are spiritual vessels. And so it's not just like your soul's living in a physical house. Like, it's so much more than that. It leaves the brain. So it leaves your body completely to protect itself from these drugs. And so when you feel like I did, and like you did, like feeling dead inside, like just empty and soul, because your soul is not there. Your soul is not there, and it's waiting for you to figure it out. And you're listening, like you talk a lot in your videos about messages, when your body is trying to tell you, your body is trying to say, like, I can't live in this, like, please fix me. And understanding that is not like, we internalize it because we're taught that we're just these bodies. So we blame ourselves when we're told that it's a chemical imbalance, that it's genetic. We end up hating ourselves. And that self-hatred, that energy directed against ourselves, just makes us sicker and sicker and sicker. And there's just so many levels to it. Yeah. Making your body inhospitable with viruses, cleaning out your body, makes your whole body a home for your soul. And then everything just works better and you feel better and you can age gracefully and without Botox, because I quit. It's so tempting. It's so tempting to go back into it. But I want to ask you about, as we begin to wrap up here, I want to ask you about Free Range Psychiatry and the organization that you started and what it's like to work with you. If somebody who's listening to this, whether it's on TikTok or through the podcast, wherever you can listen to it, when they come to you and they say, I want to get off meds, what's that like?
Oh, great question. First, I want to say, yes. So Free Range Psychiatry is an organization. I founded it about a little over 5 years ago now. We're actually a nonprofit organization. Currently, it's myself, and we have other people that are a part of it. There's another holistic psychiatrist, Dr. Jennifer Giordano, who works with us right now. I also have a fellowship. So there's different sides of Free Range Psychiatry. Right now, one of those arms of Free Range Psychiatry is what's called the fellowship. And that's where I'm actually training other people. So we have all different kinds of healers in there. There are nurse practitioners, doctors, psychiatrists, therapists, all different kinds of people learning essentially how to do what it is that I do, holistic psychiatry. So that's another aspect. And then we also see patients. Right now, we are fully virtual. We can see anybody anywhere in the world, actually, via a virtual visit, but we can only prescribe to deprescribe. We don't prescribe otherwise, but to deprescribe, we can only do that in about 6 or 7 states because of the licensing laws. Basically, how that works is people just have to get somebody who's willing to write the prescriptions if they need to taper off of them. So essentially what we do when it comes to helping patients is we really help anybody through what we call holistic psychiatry, which I mean full mind, body, spirit approach to healing. We help people who've never been on psychiatric medication. So we do have some people that come in and say, I've been seen by a psychiatrist. They want me to take drugs, but I don't want to. Please help. That's probably like 5%, 10% though. The majority of people that come to see us are people who are on psychiatric medications, but really want to get off. As we touched on a little bit, and I have a lot of content on, these drugs can be hella difficult. These drugs are highly addictive. And I do use the word addictive on purpose, but that's probably a whole side story. But they are highly addictive and they are incredibly difficult to get off. It's not one's fault. It is just how the physiological changes and everything that happens in a body. So that's our real sort of niche area, is that we use a holistic approach to help people get off of drugs. And then some people come to us because they got off of them, but they're just feeling miserable because they're still in withdrawal or whatever reason. So we help those people as well. I'm currently not accepting any new patients because I'm blessed to have many, many patients. And right now I'm at capacity. But Dr. Jennifer Giordano, who went through our fellowship, and she's been at Free Range now for 2 or 3 years, does have availability. So we do have the ability to see people. It just wouldn't be me at this time, but she is absolutely amazing. She does everything that I do. She's exactly minded the way I do. And I literally trained her through everything. Our website, by the way, is freerange.org. You can go there, click the book appointment link. You can book either a free discovery call with us right now, or just go ahead and book the first visit if you feel like you resonate. There's a lot of information on the website about what it is that we do, how we do it. The general idea is that we take, when I say mind, body, spirit, we essentially use really literally everything. But let me give you some examples of things that we do. We help people on the biological angle. We do lab testing of people. So we look for hormone imbalances, nutritional imbalances, thyroid problems, like all these different problems to see how much of your symptoms are being caused by some medical problem. And 99.9999% of our patients have something. Almost everybody has something, usually multiple things. That's one aspect of what we do. We work with people using things like vitamins and supplements. So we do use a lot of vitamins and supplements, especially because a lot of people have a lot of vitamin deficiencies. We do things like advising people on dietary changes. So as you know, diet is huge. And as I know, because I went through it, what we eat is what affects our brain and our body. So we do that. We also integrate things like mind body stuff. For example, I'm a yoga teacher. Dr. Giordano is very into yoga and meditation. So we incorporate that in there. Other types of spiritual practices, therapy, essentially the whole thing. We literally do it all, talking to you about your sleep, your relationships, every single aspect of your life, looking at it from a holistic lens and figuring out where are the areas. And different from the traditional psychiatric model, though, we're not going to be like, this is your problem, this is your diagnosis, do this. We're very, very more into giving back the power to the person. So we don't just tell you what to do. We say, what would you like to do? What is your intuition telling you? And that's how we go with the people. We're like the guide, and we'll give you recommendations, but we don't just shove things in. And then we also do, though, very specific tapering plans with you. We'll help you talk step by step. How are you going to get off of this drug? And we do have experience working with every different type of psychiatric drug. So there's no drug that we don't have experience with. We can help with all of them.
Wow, I love that. I didn't know it was nonprofit. I want to know how I can get involved. I'm in school right now at the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching to become a certified professional coach. And that's exactly how I coach. I did coaching with my old business. You kind of have to if you're in that, coaching people to how to start their own businesses. But having gone through what I've gone through, and I just keep crossing paths with people and the things that I'm learning, and I'm the guide. That's what coaching is. I didn't know that's what coaching was. I thought it was just like mentoring, where you tell people what to do, kind of like how mainstream psychiatry is just telling people what to do. But what I'm learning in IPEC is everybody has the answers within. And it's that holographic thinking, the logical, the emotional, and the intuition that like works together, and getting people to move forward and realize that they're the ones with the power and that nobody can know them better than they know themselves. So yeah, I'm definitely keen to know how I can be more involved and help out, and whether it's, just to help you guys grow. I love marketing. I'm good at it. So
yeah, we need to continue this conversation then for sure. I always joke with my patients that literally my goal is for them to realize that they don't need me. And I always say, like, the day that you realize you don't need me and that you never needed me, my job is done and it's fine. So again, our model is so different than the whole, like, you start seeing a psychiatrist, you are a customer for life. Mm-hmm. For life. You are not going to, once you get on that cycle, you know how it is on the hamster wheel, you won't get off. There's no end to it. It just continues forever. And we have the exact opposite approach. From day one, we're like, how do we get you out of here on your own? And you realize truly you don't even need us at all. You have it all, and then you can just rely on that and don't need us anymore. That's our goal.
Yeah, to return the autonomy, to teach them that it's all within and that everything they need, they already have within them.
Yes.
And remembering who they are. I don't know how much the books, if you've read Conversations with God and those types of books, where we're here to remember who we are. We're here to wake up. We're here to become and express to our fullest potential who we truly want to be. And it starts with the being, not with the doing, right? It's not about what you do. It's not about what you have. It's about who you are. And when you focus on who you are, that's going to affect what you do. And what you do is going to affect what you have. So, but people have that all, it's like everything's backwards. Everything's backwards.
Yeah. And I 100% agree about that whole sort of remembering, which is very hard again, PS, when you're on these psychiatric medications. And also, I just want to clarify too that you just touched on really like the core of the work. I want to make that distinction because I think so many times when they hear holistic psychiatrists, the question is, so what do I take instead of Xanax? Right? I get that question a lot. Well, instead of Depakote, what should I be taking? What herb should I take? And I'm like, it's not that. So that is not what we do. It's not like we're just substituting an herbal thing for a drug. It truly is this entire paradigm shift, right? Of, like you're saying, realizing what we really are, remembering all that, like coming back to yourself, like embracing that, empowering yourself. It's all of that. That is where the healing's at. That's the foundational stuff that's going to be able to get you successfully off of these drugs too.
Yeah, there's so much hope. There's so much hope in knowing that your body is not the enemy. It's really not. It's here to help you and it wants to help you. But when we give it things or we don't give it things that it needs, because our food is completely devoid of nutrients like nowadays, like you gotta shop organic or grow it yourself or supplement with different vitamins to put back into your body what it's supposed to be. Like an apple has 50% fewer nutrients than it did 50 years ago or something like that. Very similar to that. It's just wild. Things you don't know could really be hurting you, and the stuff that's in our water or tap water, and we could go on and on. But this is a great initial conversation that we've had. I want to thank you so much for your time being on the podcast, Dr. Campbell. It's been such an honor and a pleasure. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
Thank you so much. And yeah, I think just the last thing that you were touching on, which is like, there is so much hope. That's the message I really want to bring home to people, is that I know I've been there. I've been in the feeling of hopelessness. I know what it feels like. The world is sort of collapsing in on you, but there truly, truly is hope. And everything that I've talked about, it may seem like a lot and like radically overhauling your life and things like that. It can seem like this big insurmountable thing, but really it is about like day by day, step by step, and you will get there, just steps towards it. Anyone can do this. This is the question I get asked a lot. They're like, yeah, but I've been on it for 30 years, or yeah, but I'm on here, or my brain isn't like, whatever. No, I don't believe that. I truly, truly, truly believe that every single human being has within them the potential and the power to heal. I believe it with every fiber of my being. If you can believe it enough, if you can keep going, like, it's there. You can heal. You just have to know and believe that you can. That's what I want everybody to know, that it is possible for everybody.
That's so powerful. Yeah, there's everything we have inside of us to heal. We can do it. We have that intuition and it's powerful. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being on the show.